Hey nerdy knitters, welcome to another episode of the Nerdy Knitting Podcast. Get your knitting and your favorite drink and let's settle in for a good chat. Our theme this month has been hat knitting. We've had a hat knitting tutorial, we've chatted about knitting hats, and I shared some of your favorite patterns. I asked about your favorite hat knitting patterns and you shared a huge list, so that was last week's video. So that is the end of our monthly theme, but we did have a poll in there as well about how many hats you've ever knit. So if you want to go answer that poll, I'll put a link for it down below. And you can go check it out as well to see what other knitters had to say about how many hats they've knit. Are you a hat knitter? Or is it just something you've done a couple times but you don't really knit them? I like knitting hats. They're great gifts. And usually, they're pretty stretchy so they can fit a variety of head sizes. So they're a nice little one skein project as well if you like to collect yarn as a hobby and then knit it up. I think those are two separate hobbies sometimes. Then hat knitting is a good thing for that stash busting as well. And I've been working on the Knitting Guild Association, their professional design course. I finished module 2 a while ago, over the summer maybe, I don't remember. And I'm working on module 2 right now. I finished module 1, did I say that? And I'm working on module 2. It's 3 modules all together. And this one really focuses on very specific design things like grading patterns, and 2 of the things I have to do are actually writing 2 patterns that would be ready to publish. And that's all I have left to do. I've done everything else. There's like questions to answer and some different exercises to do. I'm working on one of the patterns right now, and they have specific parameters you have to follow for the patterns. So I've chosen a few stitch patterns, and I'm thinking about color choices right now because one of them is, the focus is knitting with color. So that's what I'm working on for sort of my educational knitting, I guess, because I like to use knitting in that way. I love it as a hobby, but I also like it to learn new things. So I'm using that course right now. I finished the master's program. I mentioned that in the last video. I've passed and I've got my certificate behind me. I need to get a frame for it. But so now I'm working on the design course. And after that, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. I have been thinking about doing, I'm inspired by watching Roxanne Richardson's YouTube channel, and she's been doing some historical knitting like sweaters through the 20th century. And I admire that, and I kind of want to do something similar. So I'm sort of like letting it simmer in my brain about what I'd like to do. That might be the next thing to explore, is how, for me, it would be learning how knitting patterns have changed through the years, like starting with, present day knitting patterns or early 2000s perhaps, and then working backwards to see, how patterns have changed through history. And I'm not sure, I Googled, but I couldn't really find anything I just did like a 2-second search. I didn't really look. Like the oldest sweater knitting pattern, like how old are they? That people wrote down like an actual sort of recipe or a pattern or something like that for specifically sweaters. So I'm not sure. That's something to think about. I like the idea of that, and that might be something to explore after I finish the design course. And personal, like I like to read as well. So I like to chat about books. So I've been rereading the Lord of the Rings books. I don't know if anybody here has watched the Amazon Prime, The Rings of Power. We just finished it this weekend, and I don't want to disparage the show too much, but it feels, my husband had the word for it. It's like it was shallow, I guess would be the word for it. If you like the fantasy, medieval kind of thing, it fits that genre. As far as being as deep, I guess would be the word, as like Tolkien's world, it felt like it was just scratching the surface for me. If you've ever read a lot of modern books, they're probably written on like a high school reading level. There's probably still some that are classified as literature, but that would require more brain power. But I would say most like modern fiction, I'm talking specifically fiction here, is probably more geared towards like high school reading level. But of course, older books take more brain power or different parts of the brain, and Tolkien's works I would consider something like that. They're not fluff. A lot of modern books aren't either. I don't want to disparage them. I read a lot of fiction, like current fiction, and I enjoy it for what it is, but I can, relax and read it before bed. It doesn't take too much brain. It's not very taxing on the brain, I guess. But Tolkien's books are a different level, honestly. I mean, I would consider them classics. I mean, Dickens or Jane Austen, they can be fun and relaxing depending on your own, I don't know, brain power, I guess. But for me, they take a little more work to read. Like it's a different type of reading, I guess that would be the way to say it. And I feel like the show is like that. It's fluff, it's candy, it's entertaining, but it's not very deep. It's missing, I think it tried to be deep, but I don't know. For me personally, it missed the mark. It didn't have the depth that Tolkien's stories do. And to a point, the original movie trilogy, I really enjoyed those. I just actually rewatched them again because The Rings of Power made me want to really dive back into Tolkien's world. And of course, they're fairly good adaptations. They don't get everything, but it's hard to adapt a book to a movie or a TV show. And admittedly, the TV show Rings of Power didn't have as much source material. So there is that, but I don't know. I'm still like undecided. I think it was shallow. The pacing was bad. Like it felt like nothing happened for the first, 6 episodes. And then everything that was supposed to happen didn't happen until the very end in the last few. And I kind of figured out who everybody was, like which character was Gandalf and which one was Sauron. Like I knew right away. Like it wasn't a big surprise, to know who was who. And I wasn't a huge fan of Galadriel. I would think at this point in the story, she's like, 1,000 years old. She should have developed some diplomacy skills by now. And she hasn't. She's terrible at trying to communicate with other people. And I don't know. I didn't, that was kind of interesting to me. The characters you're supposed to cheer on, I didn't really care for. I did like sort of like the bad guys. I liked Halbrand and I liked Adar. I would have liked to have more of his story. Like I think his backstory would have been very interesting and they didn't have much of it. I actually liked him. His character was more interesting to me than like Galadriel's. I don't know. I feel like I'm just complaining about, I don't know, but I guess it left me wanting more. Not of that particular show, of just more depth of like the Tolkien, the themes, like just bravery and honesty and trust and fellowship and brotherhood and just so many wonderful themes to explore. And I feel like they didn't really dive deep into any of those themes. So for me, it wasn't, I don't know. And maybe part of it is like, because I've homeschooled my daughter. So I've been sort of like a teacher for her whole school career. And we read a lot of books. We listened to a lot of audiobooks. We discussed a lot of books. And then as she got older, we'd read a book and we'd watch the movie, compare the two, talk about the differences. And one of the courses that we went through, they had like 3 things that every movie or book should have in each scene. Like it should either build the world somehow and show you like the rules and the structure of that world in the novel or in the movie. It should move the plot forward in some manner, or it should show you something about either the main character, the protagonist, or some of the antagonists, like their motivations or what drives them or their character progression. So those are like the 3 things that you should see in any scene in a movie. If it has 1, you're doing okay. If it has all 3, then it's really doing a good job. And I was thinking about that as we watched Rings of Power, and I felt like it didn't really do justice to any of those things. Like the plot did not move along in, goodness, what was it? 8 hours altogether, 8 episodes. That's enough for 3 movies. There should have been more plot development and at a better pace. And you didn't see much character development. Galadriel did not change at all. And she's basically the protagonist. She was the same from beginning to end. The only thing different is that she learned who Sauron was at the end. but you don't see that character develop at all. Just things like that. Things that should happen in a good story, whether it's on a screen or in a book or whatever, didn't happen here. Like, the world was beautiful. The CGI and the world they created was stunning. I loved the island of Numenor and watching their ships on the water. Like, the scenery was stunning, but you can't just depend on your scenery alone. And one nitpicky thing, I guess, my husband rolls his eyes at this one, but it really bugged me, was because if you're sort of, I guess, Tolkien fan or any of the, like, half the books are, they're taking place while they're taking a journey somewhere. The world is vast and it's huge, and you don't just like say, oh, I'm going to go visit the elves, and the next day you're knocking on their door. It's going to take you a couple weeks to get where you want to go, and that was not demonstrated very well at all in this show. It felt very jarring to see Elrond and, I can't remember the other guy's name, Elrond and the other one talking about going to visit the dwarves, and the next scene they're basically knocking on the door. I'm like, how did they get there? It's not like they're next door neighbors. They had to travel. You know what I mean? Like, that, to me personally, was very jarring. To my husband, it didn't bother him at all. But just, I don't know, I feel like a lot of Tolkien stories happen while they are traveling from place to place, and you miss that element of the travel and the journey to get there. And I don't know, but it was beautiful. Like, I will definitely give it that. The scenery was really very Tolkien-esque. I liked that, but I didn't care for most of the characters, except Adar, who was supposed to be the bad guy. I wanted to know more about his backstory, how he ended up the way he did, and his motivations. But yeah, the world was beautiful. I will give it that. But I will watch the next season, and hopefully they'll find their footing and they'll improve now that they've got all the characters introduced. But anyway, if you have watched the series, I'd love to know what you thought about it. And if you're my husband enjoyed it without being much of a Tolkien nerd. Admittedly, I'm not like a hardcore Tolkien nerd, but I've read all the books. I've read like the Silmarillion. I've read some of the other things that nobody really reads unless they're a nerd. I've looked at the maps while I'm reading to see where they're traveling. So yeah, if you, I guess it's a comparison. The people who love Tolkien's world, what they thought of the series, and those who just like a good fantasy story. My husband thought it was fine. He thought it was slow and it was kind of boring. Like, the first few episodes, nothing really happens besides introducing everybody, and they took a long time to do that. So he found it boring, but he liked it overall, in general. But he's not like raring to, so excited to wait for season 2. I'm not. I'll watch it when it comes out, but anyway, I guess that's enough chat about that. But it did inspire me to reread the books and rewatch the movies. So I watched all of those while I was working on a new design this week, which I can't talk about, but I watched all the movies, and I that was kind of funny because the design I'm working on had a deadline. So I told my husband, my work this week is watching Lord of the Rings. Basically, it's because I had to sit and knit. So, I can watch TV while I knit. So I had to get that project done. So it's kind of fun to know that it's technically work. I have to sit and knit for work. So I rewatched those, and I've been rereading. I'm about 2/3 of the way through the Fellowship of the Ring, the books. So that's what I've been reading this week, and probably finish that series. And I would like to read more of the history of Middle Earth stuff. I guess watching the show did jog the memories of like different characters and things like that. So if nothing else, it's inspired me to go back and reread Tolkien. It's been a long time since I've read the Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit I've read more often. That was probably one of our favorite read alouds. When I was reading that aloud to my daughter, it would be like she'd say one more chapter, and one night I don't know how much we read, but I was losing my voice by the time we were done, because she was just like, one more chapter, and she would sit and draw or color or something while I would read, and just have such good memories of that book. So that one's definitely a favorite. Movie adaptation's not my favorite. I think it's better than Rings of Power, though, I will give it that, but definitely not as good as the original Lord of the Rings trilogy movies. But Anyway, so let's move on to other topics. We can stop talking about that. But I would love to know what you thought about the TV show and if you're a Tolkien fan in general. Okay, and we do have some questions to answer this week because I missed answering your questions for a while. I hadn't been doing that for this monthly podcast, but honestly, I don't have a ton of knitting to share. That's why I went to a monthly format, because there isn't a ton to show you every week. And I wanted it to be useful, and I feel like answering your questions would make the podcast more useful than just showing you what I'm working on. So we do have a few questions to address. So Knee Deep in Stitches wants to know, I was wondering if you had any tips or know of why my purling tension might be looser than my knitting. Okay, so we'll talk about the whys and then the fixes. So the whys, it depends on how you hold the yarn and needles. I know that's really a generic answer, but that's really what it comes down to. And I have heard that it depends on whether you hold the yarn in your right hand or your left. In general terms, most people who hold the yarn while they knit in their right hand purl more loosely than they knit. If you hold the yarn in your left hand, generally, you are going to purl more tightly than you knit. Now, this is just a generalization because everybody holds their yarn and their needles differently. They wrap it around their fingers in different ways. Like, everybody is unique. So it depends on which way you're holding it. And it depends on how you hold your needles. Depends on where you knit on your needles. Are you knitting right on the tips? Are you knitting right on both barrels of the needles? That can affect your tension. And if, say, you knit your knit stitches on the tips of the needles, but then when you purl, you're purling on both barrels, you're making those stitches larger. It's not even technically a tension issue. It's how you're creating the stitch with the needles. Because if you're crossing both barrels all the way, then you're widening that stitch, where if you're keeping it right on the tips, then you're making that stitch smaller. Does that make sense? So the why is, I feel like it's such a generic answer. But it really does come down to how you specifically hold your yarn and your needles. And now the fixes for that is also sort of generic. It depends on what you're doing. Like, okay, I can give you my example. Like, I purl more tightly than I knit because I hold the yarn in my left hand. When I bring it forward to purl, after I create as I'm purling, I'm pulling down on the yarn. That makes it more tight. I don't do that when I knit. I just let my finger tension the yarn here, and I'm not doing anything to that yarn. I don't know if you can see while I'm knitting here. But when I bring it to the front to purl, I'm using my finger to hold it down and wrap it around, and that makes it tighter. So that's what I do. You're probably going to be doing something else. So I encourage you to watch while you're knitting and try to figure out why you're creating that stitch that's looser. So it's going to come down to, like I said before, the needle tips and the barrels of the needles, where they are as you're creating the stitch, where you're working that stitch, how you're tensioning the yarn with your hands. If you're doing something with your fingers, like I said with me, I tend to pull down on that purl stitch as I'm creating it, and that makes it tighter than my than my knit stitches, because I don't do that with my knit stitches. I only do it with my purl stitches. So I didn't know that until I sat and really paid attention to what I was doing. So look at your hands, look at your fingers as you're forming those stitches. Are you doing something different to the yarn at that point? And probably you are. Everybody does. A knit stitch and a purl stitch are just the same. They're two sides of the same coin, basically. But the way you create them, your hands are manipulating your materials in a different way, and that can affect how they look. And of course, I can always give you the advice to always only ever knit in the round and you never have to purl again, which is never that's not gonna work. It's better to figure out why you're doing what you're doing and fix it. Not fix it, but adjust it or know why it happens. Like for me, I still purl the same way, but now I know don't pull on that stitch or it's going to have tighter tension than my stockinette stitches, or try to be a little more firm when I work my stockinette stitches. There's lots of ways to fix it, but you can't fix it until you know what you're doing. And that really comes down to understanding what you're doing with your hands, holding those tools. So I feel like it's such a generic answer because I can't really tell why your tension is loose without watching you knit. But I encourage you to watch yourself while you're knitting. You know, don't watch TV or something like that. Just watch your hands, get into your rhythm, and then see what you're doing to cause that tension issue for yourself. And then you can make some adjustments depending on what you're doing. The next question's from Lori. Is there an alternative to ribbing that has the same effect? I'm thinking mostly cuffs on sleeves. I don't like knitting ribbing. It's too tedious. So if the effect you're thinking of is the stretch or the fit, then there are basically, if you look for any combinations of where you're making columns of knits and purls, they don't have to necessarily be just knits and purls. I've got a hat. I don't have it out, otherwise I'd show you. It's technically a rib, but it's got lace in it. But it's still columns of knits and purls, even with a stitch pattern in there. So it still has that stretch. There's lots of patterns like that. I was just flipping through a book that I'll show you more later, the Sock Knitter's Handbook. And she has a section in here. Let's see if I can find it, that talks about different stitch patterns for socks, technically, but they're technically just rib patterns, but different types of ribs, not just knits and purls. Like a seed stitch rib. I don't know if these are going to show up very well there. There we go. You can see them a little bit, I guess, but different, as long as you're looking at stitch patterns. So get some stitch dictionaries and look for stitch patterns where you get columns of knit and purl stitches, but that use some kind of stitch pattern design in there that you would prefer to knit. You still get the stretch of the knit and purl columns that you would in a rib, but you get more decorative elements. And of course, the stretch is going to change depending on the stitch pattern itself. Now, if it's not so much the stretch that you're wanting, and it's just that you need like a non-curling edge for like a stockinette sleeve or something like that, then other stitch patterns work just fine. That any stitch pattern where you're combining knits and purls evenly, it doesn't have to be in columns like you would see in rib patterns, but as long as, well, like garter stitch, one row is all knits, one row is all purls, then you repeat that. So they're still evenly distributed. That's why it lays flat. Or seed stitch, it's the same idea as rib. It's not stretchy like rib, but it will lay flat because you have an equal amount of knits and purls worked equally over the rows. That's why the ribbing works as well, because you have equal amounts of knits and purls distributed in columns specifically. But that's why stockinette curls, is because you don't have an equal distribution. You have all the knits on one side and all the purls on the other, so you get that curling. So any stitch pattern that will lay flat will fit there. Garter stitch, seed stitch, moss stitch, double moss, Irish moss. There's so many different names for all those, but they're all combinations of knits and purls distributed evenly. So that will give you the flat edges. They're not going to stretch though, but if it's a stretchy thing you want, then there are decorative ribs that you can look for. Just any stitch pattern books, or I would look, you'll see most of them in like sock knitting books. There's the Ann Budd Handy Book of Sock Patterns, or I don't know if that's the title. I know that has a section of stitch patterns that are rib patterns technically, but they have decorative elements in them as well. So that's something that you could look at. If anybody else has any advice for either one of these, for Knee Deep in Stitches or for Lori, please leave your comments down below, and I could share them in the next podcast, or you can read them if you want to see what other knitters have to say as well. So I have been doing some knitting that I can't show you, that I've been working on a design that I can't show right now. It's something I'm not even sure I'm allowed to say for who until it's released. Sometimes that happens. Some companies let me talk about things that I'm designing. Other companies want it to be kept a secret until it's published. So, but I am working on a hat and some mittens. Here is one of the mittens right here I'm working on. If you've been around at all, you know I sent off a design for a sweater that my first sweater design, and it had this stitch pattern on it. This Chevron illusion is what I called it. And I really like the stitch pattern, and I had some leftovers from designing the sweater. So I thought I'm going to think I have enough to do like a pair of mittens and a hat. So I've started the hat. It's not working out the way I wanted, so I've pulled it out and I'm reworking it. What I didn't like, I made sort of a tam style because I like a fuller hat. So it's got a smaller brim, and then I did a Latvian braid, and then the pattern, and then another Latvian braid, and then the color, main color for the hat, and then I'll put a pom-pom on top, I think. But I had the whole thing done, and I tried it on, and I just didn't love this part. I feel like it's actually too wide. So I think I'm going to divide it right in half and just do a smaller band of this on there. That would really be cute. It's just like an ear warmers too, maybe. Maybe that's another pattern I can put in there. So I'm reworking the hat. That needs some work, but I like the tam size of it. Like it starts out with less stitches, and then I increase like another third of the stitch count, I think, to get like the fullness for that. So I'm still working on that. It's not quite the way I want it. So I'm ripping it out and redoing it. And there is a mitten in progress with the same design, the Latvian braid and the pattern on the cuff. And I'm working on the thumb gusset right now, so you can see what it's gonna look like when it's done. I'm not sure about sizing for this because the stitch pattern is like, it's about 2 inches to do one repeat of the pattern. So that's a big jump in sizes. So I might just have to do one size for the mittens. For the hat, that's not such a big deal. I can do multiple sizes for a hat every 2 inches, but for mittens, there's not a huge difference in hand size. But anyway, and even the sizing for this, I started on 8s and it was way too loose, and then I tried 7s and that was still, I didn't really like it. So I'm down to size 6. And I think for mittens, I prefer something a little closer and warmer. You know, you want warm hands. So anyway, I think I like it on the size 6. So we're working on that. I think I like how that's coming out. I really like the cuff. And I like they're sort of reversible. They match, but they're not exactly the same. White mittens, pink hat. So that's coming along nicely. So this is using Julie Asselin yarns. That's a yarn company here in Quebec. Her Journey worsted. I think it's 100% wool. I want to say it's all sourced from North America. I think. Find my label. Yes, and it is 80% Rambouillet and 20% Targhee. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it basically works out to a really soft wool. It has that feel like it's got a good nice twist. It's like a 3-ply or a 4-ply, 4 maybe, and a nice twist. So you get a good durable yarn. So I think it's going to be really great for mittens, but it's not scratchy at all. Like some wools can be scratchy. This is not scratchy. It feels sturdy, but also pretty soft. So it's really nice yarn. So the colors are Naturel and Fleur. So it is a Quebec-based company. So a lot of the color names are probably going to be French names. Now, since it seems I have started with what's on my needles, I will continue with that. I am working on a new wrap design that will come out next spring. Got the pattern all worked out. I knit a little swatch so I know the basic instructions. So I'm just knitting away right now. This is going to be the scarf size. I'm going to have like a scarf size and then a larger wrap size. So this one will take 2 skeins of yarn this size. Now this is a silk and linen blend from Alley Cat Yarns. They're based in Canada as well. This color is called Goldenrod, and I've got another color for the wrap that I really like as well. It's called Platinum. It's like this beautiful silver. It's a really nice sheen to this that's kind of showing up on the camera already. That silk in there is giving it a beautiful sheen, and it's got a really nice drape. All it is just a knit 2 purl 2 rib I-cord edge, but it's knit on the bias. So I started here and I'm working increases at both edges until it's sort of as wide as I want it to be. And then I'll start going, that way where you're increasing on one edge, decreasing on the other for the length that you want. So I'm still working on the increase section to get my width. And it's just it's relaxing knitting because it's just knit 2 purl 2 rib. It's very simple. But there's a bit going on because I got to pay attention to my increases and my I-cord edge and all of that. So I'm just giving myself a lot of time to do it because I've got the 2 to knit. So it's sort of at this point just kind of hanging out, and when I've got a free moment, I can grab this and work on it. So it's working really well for that. But that pattern won't be coming out until spring because, I mean, silk and linen yarn, nobody's really wearing stuff like that right now. We've all switched to our warm woolly garments. And the last thing on my needles is the beginning of our sock knitting series. I've knit the first sock. I still have to knit the second one. We're going to start with socks on double pointed needles from cuff to toe and with a heel flap and gusset. For these, I've done just a plain stockinette heel flap and then a round or French heel right there. I don't know if that's showing up very well, that light pink, in this beautiful stripy yarn. And I love how I didn't plan it at all, but the stripe pattern worked out very, very, very well. Because when you get to this point, you have to stop and do your heel and your heel turn and then start in the round. And I couldn't have asked for that to come out more. I used just enough of the repeat there that when I started knitting in the round again, the pattern wasn't interrupted at all. So just a happy chance. And the colors, this yarn is really lovely. This is a Scrumptious Purl. It comes just like this, all in a ball ready to knit up. A self-striping yarn. So this color is called Christmas Berries, which is really pretty. So I really like it. And it's really great to knit with. It is 80% superwash merino and 20% nylon. So it's nice soft sock. And all of the regular information that you would need for knitting socks, like the gauge, hand wash, cold water, dry flat, all of that. But Scrumptious Purl, if you like self-striping yarns, she's got a great selection of them and they're all ready to go. They come just like this in a ball. I've got another one back here that I'll show you later on, but I like these colors too. But really fun colorways. And great to knit with. And I'm so happy that I'm usually not so picky about my socks, but I was just very happy that the striping just seemed to continue perfectly along the top here. So when it's worn, it doesn't have some weird color change where I had used some yarn to do the heel. So that worked out very, very well. So this pattern will be coming out next month. We're going to start off, I think we're going to take 6 months to talk about socks. So hopefully that's something that's interesting to you. Each month we'll have a different tutorial about a specific way to knit socks, and we'll do the different methods as well. The different the different circumference methods for knitting small circumferences in the round. Can I get my words out, please? Like double pointed needles, magic loop, 2 at a time on magic loop, shorties, flexible double pointed needles. 2 circulars. I think that's it. That's 6 of them, right? So we're going to have a pattern for each of those methods, but then we're also going to explore some different sort of sock constructions. Like with our double pointed sock construction, we're doing the standard heel flap gusset, but the heel flap here is plain stockinette. So you can just get an idea of how it's worked. If you've never done a heel flap, you're not doing any fancy stitch patterns for the heel flap, just knitting and purling. And then this specific type of heel is called a round heel or a French heel. And there's other types of heels as well, so we'll explore those in other tutorials. So this is the first one. So I've got to sit down probably this week and get the other sock knit and record the tutorial for that sock. But that is everything that is on my needles right now. And off my needles, I have a new design. It is on the mannequin behind me. That is the longer infinity scarf size. You can still double it over like a cowl. And then there is the cowl size. I wasn't sure I would like these colors together, but I think they're very fun. It sort of reminds me of cotton candy. So what is going on here is a seed stitch border at each edge. And then in the middle is more seed stitch in this chevron design. But then in between you have this Suri alpaca. So you get that brushed alpaca, that fluffy, fuzzy feel. But you're doing stranded knitting with this in the round. When I did my swatch, I did it flat, and oh boy, I did not like that because I had to do like the seed stitch pattern on the wrong side rows. Plus I was stranding the colors together. So that was something, I'll tell you. But in the round, super simple. I mean, if you've ever done stranded knitting it's that, but it's easier because the brushed alpaca is much more forgiving because it just fills in all that space. And then the chevron design, you're doing that stranded knitting, but you're also purling, so that adds another layer of interest to it. So this chevron pattern still has that seed stitch texture. You can see the texture in there. I wanted to play with the texture of, well, seed stitch, and then the texture of the yarn as well. And I have to tell you, I have knit with some alpaca yarns, and I would say I wasn't really a fan because I found them very, very scratchy. This one, it's like knitting with air. It is so soft. And honestly, I'm not, like, I have knit with alpaca before, and I guess it just wasn't good quality alpaca because I found it itchy and I really didn't like it. And usually I don't like to wear fuzzy sweaters because I don't like the way they feel. The feel of this yarn is, honestly, it's amazing. It is so soft. And I am picky when it comes to scratchy yarns. I don't like, or scratchy fuzzy yarns. Like a scratchy wool I'm okay with because I can wear a shirt underneath. If the cardigan, I have a cardigan that is a scratchy wool, but I wear something underneath it, so I don't care. But when it's around my neck or touching my face or something like that, and it's fuzzy and scratchy, I despise it. I don't like it at all. And this does not feel that way. Sadly, I have to mail these samples off. I don't get to keep them. So I probably am going to buy some more and knit another one of these because I'm not kidding. Like, this alpaca is very, very soft. So you probably want to know where it's from. This is from Biscotte Yarns. I'll have a link for them down below. This is another yarn company that's here in Canada, in Quebec. And this is the Louise Robert, or Robert. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. She's French, so maybe she does have the French pronunciation for her name. The Louise Robert Suri alpaca. And I am not kidding when I tell you it's so soft. Like, I just want to rub my face on this because it's so, so soft. And I don't usually like fuzzy things to wear myself. I like the way they look on other people, but I hate wearing them because I don't like that fuzziness because I usually find it very scratchy. And this, I don't find scratchy at all. So I might have found an alpaca yarn that I like from a company here in Canada. So you can see there's the inside, the stranding on the inside, which looks kind of cool on its own too. So the pattern's going to have 3 sizes: the cowl that, sits close to your neck, and then this longer infinity scarf that you can double and wear as a cowl, and then probably one that's going to be longer than that as well. Well, not probably, will be. So this is a 2 skein project. You need 1 skein of the main yarn, and then you need 1 skein of the alpaca. And this size is a 3 skein project. You need 2 skeins of that burgundy, and then the 1 skein of the alpaca. So I like the colors on that one as well too. But anyway, I think for the largest size, I haven't worked out the math for that, but it's probably going to be 3 skeins of your wool and then 1 skein still of the alpaca because there's so much of it in 1 skein. But, oh, and the other yarn, I should tell you about that too. This is the Biscotte yarns. It's their Griffon colorway, not colorway. It's the Griffon yarn line, which is a superwash wool, I think, like an Aran weight superwash wool. It's very soft as well. So I know I keep touching it because it's very, very soft. I think I am definitely going to be buying some yarn and knitting another one of these for myself. Probably one like that, or maybe like an even longer one, because I like them long where I can double them over, but they're not like right up against my neck, and they feel like really warm and floofy, like a big cowl neck on a sweater, So this is off my needles. Got to get the pattern done and sent off. And that is everything that I've been knitting. That's it for the knitting, but I still have things to talk about, like that yarn that I was using for my sock yarn. I have another, for my sock pattern. I've got another one. This is going to be for, what's coming? December's tutorial. We're going to do magic loop socks, 1 at a time magic loop socks, and then we'll tackle 2 at a time magic loop socks. So this is the next one that's coming, also from Scrumptious Purl. I like her little tag. She's got a dog he's got a sock in his mouth. He's very cute. So this one is cornflowers, and I love these colors. It reminds me of like probably one of my favorite paintings is, well, his series of paintings is Monet's painting his garden, his water lilies and things like that. And he always uses these blues and greens, these really calm, beautiful colors. And this sort of reminds me of that. So our next pair of socks in December will be in this color. Cornflowers in her Stripe Me Up from Scrumptious Purl. And also I have a pattern that is out this week for this slip stitch cable hat. It's cables, but it's such a simple cable. It's very simple to do. It's using Malabrigo Mecha. I think the color is called Paysandu. It's very, very soft, lovely, superwash, bulky yarn. So this tutorial came out this month, a few weeks ago. So I'll put a link down below for that too. If you're looking for a new stash buster project, you've got a skein of bulky yarn, then a little beanie. Give you a great way to use that up. Nice soft yarn. Will feel comfy on your head. That's the one place I don't like scratchy yarn, is like on my neck or on my head, where it's like on my forehead. I'm kind of picky about my wool then. I want something nice and soft. But anyway, and we have to talk about books because this is the Nerdy Knitting Podcast and we have to get a bit nerdy with our books. I've got lots of floofy bits of yarn here. So since we are talking socks for the next few months, I wanted to talk about some books that I've been looking at. I have a fabulous local library system here. I can order books online and my husband picks them up and they just magically show up at my door. So I can go online and see what they have for knitting books and sock knitting books. And I just ordered a whole stack and I've been going through them to see what other tips and techniques I can include in the videos that are coming up, or book recommendations. And this book is a fabulous book. It's on my wish list now. This is a library copy, but it's on my to buy list because I really like it. The Sock Knitter's Handbook by Charlene Schurch and Beth Parrott. So I will show you, go to the overhead and show you some of the pages in here. So it covers all of the basic things like the architecture of a sock. It explains that, the materials you need, your gauge, and all of that kind of thing. But where it really shines is the instructions for a wide variety of sock sizes. I don't even know how many, but the basic instructions for like a cuffed toe sock and then a toe to cuff sock. And then all the different ways you can knit a heel or knit a toe. All of that's in here. And there's even a stitch dictionary in the back, so you can add stitch patterns to any of these basic patterns. So if you are one of those people who likes to sort of take a basic pattern and add your own elements to it, this is the book for you for socks. If you want to do that with socks and you want to explore different ways to knit toes and heels until you discover your favorite method. I still haven't discovered my favorite method and it also depends on the foot. Like my foot is different than my daughter's foot. So the heel that fits my foot might not be the best choice for her foot. There's so much you can explore with sock knitting and find like the basic pattern that you love and then apply all these fun stitch patterns to it. Or whenever you do get a new sock pattern, you can switch out the heel on that sock for your favorite method. But she really explains all of the different heels and toes and the different construction methods very, very well in lots of different sizes. So if you like one go-to resource for sock knitting, I would put this at the top of the list because it's really a great resource. So that wraps up another episode of the Nerdy Knitting Podcast. We've talked about a lot of knitting and answered some questions and shared some great resources and some new Canadian yarn dyers, so you can try out some new to you yarns. And I'm so happy you joined me for this episode. If you're new here and you're looking for past episodes, I'll put a playlist right here and you can click through and catch up on past episodes. And I'll see you in the next video.